Bridlington is situated on the east coast of Yorkshire, lying in a sheltered bay and protected by the arm of the rugged Flamborough coastline. Over the years, the clean sandy beaches and safe sailing water have made Bridlington one of the most popular seaside resorts in the whole of England. It has also, like many other towns and cities, seen changes during its lifetime.
As I sit here on the north wall of the harbour, it's interesting to think that according to history books, there's been a harbour operational here for some 900 years. Many years ago, though, the scene would look a lot different than it does today.
Bridlington was originally two towns. The old town lying a mile inland, and the quay with its wooden piered harbour on the coast. Over the years, the harbour has gradually been developed. A succession of wood and stone piers were replaced with stone ones between 1843 and 1870, and the harbour became a very popular attraction for strolling and sailing. The paddle tugboat, the Frenchman, was always a great favourite during the summer months, so much so that she was lengthened in 1906 to increase her payload. The type of boat seen here could be used for taking parties out for a trip around the bay or for commercial fishing during the rest of the year. The buildings at the end of the pier are the Victoria Rooms, which were built in 1846. They included a reading room, newsroom, billiard room and ballroom. And as seen by the signs on the building on the right of this photograph, even in those days one could have an instant photograph taken whilst on holiday. However, on the 22nd of September 1933, disaster struck and the Victoria Rooms were destroyed by fire. This view, looking down the North Pier, shows how popular the harbour was in those times, and in that respect, it hasn't changed at all.
Today, the scenic harbour at Bridlington is as popular as ever it was. During the summer months, yacht races in the bay are promoted by the Royal Yorkshire Yacht Club. And when the fishing fleet comes in, to see them unloading their catch is always an interesting sight. And visitors can stand and see this from a walkway above the fish quay on the South Pier. For those who like to catch their own supper, the South Pier is open for fishing all year round, and the North Pier during the winter months. Bridlington Harbour has been developed over the years as an improved public amenity. £1.25 million has been spent on new shops, and all the facilities one would expect from a first-class seaside resort can be found here. Whether your interests lie in sailing, fishing, or just wandering round the many shops and places of interest, Bridlington has it all. But for many, the glorious harbour is still the centre of attraction. The Priory Church of St Mary the Virgin was founded between 1113 and 1114 and was originally much larger than this photograph shows. Parts were destroyed or fell into disrepair after the death of the last prior, William Wood. Of the towers that remain in the photograph, it's not certain whether the tops were ever completed or had been removed. The school on the left is the National School for Infants, built in 1857 and remaining in use until 1910. It was demolished in 1917, thus giving the Priory a more open outlook. In 1875, Sir Gilbert Scott restored the west front and raised the towers to their present height. Visitors today still derive a great deal of pleasure from this fine old church, and also from the nearby gatehouse, known as the Bale, which is now a museum and holds a superb collection of Bridlington's past. The cobbled cottages on the left of this photograph stood in what was Nungate and were demolished in the 1960s to make way for road improvements. The building on the right was the business of a scrap metal dealer, the late Harry Dixon. His grandson Barry continues in business today in the same property. And this is the same area today, known as Sowerby Road. The old town of Bridlington is now a conservation area, and apart from the types of business carried out, there's been little change to the structure of the properties. The high street is lined with quaint little shops, and is the ideal place to hunt for curios and antiques. One major change in the marketplace has been the demolition of the central buildings. On the top right of the picture, the High Street nameplate can be seen on the building that is now the post office. In this photograph of the lower end of St. John Street, the buildings on the left were eventually demolished to make way for the opening of Brett Street, and the trees seen here screened the home of Dr. Brett, whose house was adapted and enlarged by John Bilson of Hull for use as a girls' high school. In 1976, in the introduction of comprehensive education, the school became the lower part of Bridlington School. The Baptist Church in Key Road, shown here around 1879, was to provide seating for 508, a schoolroom and vestries, etc., and was to cost £3,200. The first stone was laid by Alderman Joseph Brooke of Huddersfield, and the work was contracted to Mr. John Renard of Bridlington. Although the schoolroom was not completed in the first phase, the first stone was laid in 1898, and the schoolroom was opened on the 10th of January 1899. This room was to prove very useful indeed during the Second World War as a rest centre for people who'd been bombed out of their homes. In 1985, the tower and main part of the church had become unsafe, and the building was unfortunately demolished. The Magistrates' Court, shown here to the left of where the church stood, was built in 1881. The old town hall of Bridlington stood majestically near the harbour, but with the growth of the borough and the increase in number of staff, larger premises were to be required. Consequently, the White Lodge estate in Key Road was acquired by the council in 1924-25 for a price of £6,500 and consisted of about 4.5 acres of land, which included the large house. The town hall today, which has been converted from the old house, is still on the same site, and with the well-kept gardens is a most imposing sight, both by day and by night. Looking down Key Road in the late 1800s, on the left we can see a water cart being refilled from a street hydrant. This cart would then soak the road in an attempt to keep down the dust. The smaller of the spired churches, seen in the distance, was dedicated to St. William and was the first Roman Catholic church in Bridlington. Today the same area is lined with offices of accountants and solicitors, large shops and the general post office. And Key Road is also one of the main thoroughfares into the centre of the town. Many areas of Bridlington have seen quite a change, and this view of Key Road is hardly recognisable from that of today, unless one takes a special note of the roofs of the houses, which today are no longer used as residential premises. Although the rooftops are the same, the building on the right is now the General Post Office. And of the other properties in the row, they are now being used for commerce, such as a solicitor's, furniture store, chemists, and a social club. This very early view of Christ Church shows it without its spire. The church is around 188 years old, and has the reputation of being the first church designed by the late Sir Gilbert Scott. In 1851, the church was enlarged, and the spire added in 1859. Several alterations have taken place since the church was completed, and today it is still an imposing sight, standing on the junction of Key Road and Wellington Road, on the way into the town centre. Behind the street organ in the centre of this photograph, taken of the corner of Beck Hill and Manor Street, stands a large building known as Manor House. It was built in 1830 and was the residence of a Dr. Whitehead, who came from Sheffield and set up practice here in 1910. Sadly, this is one of Bridlington's lost buildings. Manor House was demolished to make way for Lloyd's Bank, which now stands on this site. The old walled rear garden of Manor House now lies anonymously as the car park for the businesses on Beck Hill. Whilst change can be seen on the left of this present-day view, the building on the right has seen little. The business has changed, but the building is almost identical to that in the previous picture.
the most notable part being the architecture around the doorway. On the opposite corner, the photograph here shows the Methodist Chapel in the now renamed Chapel Street. It was built in 1879 to a design by architect William Freeman. A Methodist chapel had previously been built in 1833 on the Esplanade, but had fallen into disuse by 1867 and was later demolished in 1869. The chapel shown here was operative until 1969, and in that same year it too was demolished. Today the site is occupied with new buildings, the ground floor of which is used by the Iceland Frozen Foods Group, with the upper floor being the main offices of Bridlington's Barclays Bank. The most noticeable changes to the promenade seen here are the buildings on the left. Originally a Methodist chapel built in 1872 stood among the houses. This was deregistered in 1958 and later demolished. In the distance can be seen the Trinity Church, which today looks down upon the changes made to this busy thoroughfare. The houses on the left again replaced by commercial premises. At the junction of Princess Terrace with the promenade, seen here in 1859, a lamp post was strategically placed by Mr. Purvis the chemist to prevent the horse-drawn carts and carriages from cutting the corner. Today the lamppost has gone, but a chemist shop remains on the same site. This is now a double-fronted shop, Holroyd's chemists having purchased the premises next door, extended, then fully modernised the property, and it's currently in the hands of chemist Mr. T. Nixon. Near to Nixon's chemists, this area of the promenade has also seen changes. The municipal car park seen here was previously the main bus station of Bridlington. It was run by the East Yorkshire Motor Services Group. The buildings on the right were used as the booking office, driver's quarters, and waiting room. This large chimney was on the same site in 1823 and was part of the Simpson Brewery. Simpson's were one of the 5 breweries in business in Bridlington at the time. Also seen here are Burrell's livery stables, which advertised riding lessons daily with a riding school, high-class hacks and hunters with quiet ponies for children. The railway line, which was opened in 1846, can just be seen between the fences in the centre of this picture of Jimmy Tenny, or Jemmy Temmy Lane as it was called in 1887. The Priory Church with its raised towers can be seen in the distance. This lane was to be developed using plans by Sheffield architect Joseph Earnshaw into the now more recognisable Tennyson Avenue. The large 3-floored Victorian terrace houses were built on both sides and are now mainly used in connection with the tourist trade of the town. This building once graced the corner of St Anne's Road and Flamborough Road, was built in the 1870s. St Anne's Convalescent Home was the project of a Captain Barnes, the architect once again Joseph Earnshaw. The first part was opened in 1878 and the cost of the project around £7,000. The home was in operation until 1941, when it was unfortunately destroyed in an air raid. The ruins, often thought to be haunted, stood for 20 years before 12 almshouses were built there in 1961, to a design by the Bridlington architect Dr. Francis Johnson. And by 1965, a further 8 were built on the same site. Moving on to the north coastline, this photograph was taken of Sands Cottage around 1925, just shortly before it was demolished to make way for new terraces. It advertised ices with cream and teas and stood on the same site where the cottage grill stands today. The north side of Bridlington, with its long line of white chalk cliffs and award-winning clean, safe beaches, is a perfect playground for young and old alike. In fact, the walk along the cliffs to the village of Sewerby seems as popular for this generation as it was for the last 2. The Alexandra was one of the finest hotels in England, built between 1863 and 1866 to a design by Mr. W. B. Stewart of Scarborough. Changing demands in the tourist trade sadly led to its demise. The last owner went bankrupt in 1975, and as the building had been badly damaged by fire, it was purchased by the Borough Council and demolished. Today, on the site of the Noble Hotel and its terraces, stands a luxury block of flats. Built in 1876, the Emperor's skating rink, seen on the right, was in operation for 12 years before being demolished. The sea wall, built by the Beaconsfield estate, took continual pounding from the North Sea and was breached in 1881 and 86. After a public outcry, a new wall was built by the local council and opened in 1888. On this bright sunny day in the early 1900s, it's interesting to see how everyone is dressed. No casual wear in sight, all seemingly overprotected from the sun. And at the bottom of the picture, the photographer, taking the ever-popular holiday souvenir photograph. And around 1923, an unusual form of entertainment was to be found on the beach, the remarkable skill of the sand artist. Strolling along the prom was a popular pastime in Bridlington, as were the summer shows introduced by the Esplanade Café Co. into the old Grand Pavilion, a large wooden structure built in 1906 on the parade extension. But, in an effort to retain a view of the bay, the building was demolished in 1936. Near to the Victoria Terrace Gardens stood a splendid house known as Fort Hall, which had taken its name from the fort that had occupied the site from 1667, and which had gallantly defended Bridlington up to the Napoleonic Wars. One of the cannons from the fort can still be seen today on the north pier of the harbour. Fort Hall was eventually demolished by the Borough Council in 1937. In the same year, in the adjoining Victoria Terrace Gardens, a new Grand Pavilion was built, which was later to be known as the Three Bs. This is now incorporated into Bridlington's Leisure World, a magnificent indoor complex with bars and entertainments, and which offers outdoor attractions indoors in a warm and sheltered climate, showing Bridlington's dedication in providing the right holiday atmosphere. This early view of the Esplanade around the 1840s shows Bishop's improved baths, which contained separate suites of rooms for men and women. The baths remained in use until the construction of the sea wall parade in 1866-67. This sea wall was built by the local Board of Health to help prevent coastal erosion and to improve the look of the promenade. In 1888 it was renamed the Royal Prince's Parade to commemorate a visit to Bridlington by Prince Albert. The 5 cast-iron shelters to the right of this photograph were removed to make way for a cafe and were transferred to the Southcliffe Gardens near to the harbour. The gardens behind the bandstand were used in 1904 to build the Floral Pavilion, which was noted for its fine musical concerts. But over the years the taste in music changed, and the support for the concerts gradually diminished, and the Floral Pavilion was finally closed in 1986. Today, the area to the north of the harbour is occupied by a fun park with fairground rides, entertainment and enjoyment for the young at heart. Prince Street has been a busy commercial area for some time now, and if we look at the large building in the centre right of the picture, we can see how little the structure has changed when we come forward in time to this photograph of the present day. The Cock and Lion Public House on the other side of Prince Street was built in the 1960s. This replaced its namesake, which unfortunately had to be demolished after being severely damaged by bombing in the Second World War. The original inn, shown here around 1890, was a building of charm and character. The Britannia was a coaching inn around the 1820s and was in use until 1941, when it too suffered the same fate as the Cock and Lion and had to be pulled down.
The site remained derelict apart from the coach house and stables, which were used as a garage until the early 1960s, when a row of modern flat-top shops were built on the same site. If we look towards the buildings in the centre of this present-day photograph, it is easy to see the resemblance to this old drawing of the same area. The road towards which the horse-drawn carriage is heading, on the left of the picture, had a house of significant importance in the history of Bridlington. Queen Henrietta Maria, wife of King Charles I, landed in Burlington, the old name for Bridlington, one February evening in 1643. She had been on a visit to Holland to try and raise funds and ammunition for the royalist cause, and had narrowly escaped the ships of Admiral Batten out at sea. She took shelter in this house in Queen's Square overlooking the harbour, but when parliamentarian ships began heavy bombardment, she left the house to take cover in the valley of the Gypsy Race. The house was from then on known as Queen's House, and stood where the harbour lights stand today. In 1902, Clough Bridge, which carried road traffic over the Gypsy Race, was widened and renamed Bridge Street. This photograph shows the old buildings having been demolished, with Hilderthorpe Road in the background. Today, Bridge Street is still one of the main thoroughfares which carries traffic from the north to the south side of the town. This photograph shows the part of the harbour into which the Gypsy Race flows after its journey to the sea. As the water passes under the old Clough Bridge, this area is appropriately named Clough Hole. The fresh water from the Gypsy Race entered into the harbour from the area at the bottom of the photograph. As the saying goes, a lot of water has flowed under the bridge from the time of the previous photograph to this one of the present day. One of the major changes to the area is the beautiful landscaping, part of which can be seen to the left of the photograph. This landscaping included a public walkway which can be seen across the centre, giving access to the north and south parts of the town without losing the scenic view of the harbour. A heavy sea is running in this scene from 1890, and a railway line can be seen in the bottom left corner. This line connected Bridlington's railway station with the harbour, crossing the Gypsy Race into Hilderthorpe. The track was removed in 1917 after falling into disuse in 1866. The row of houses behind the railway engine is Pembroke Terrace, which today, although extended, consists of flats and hotels, all catering for the thriving tourist industry of the town. In 1896, the Whittaker brothers from Horsforth in the West Riding bought the land shown here and built the spar and spar wall within a year. Further extensions were made to shape the South Sea wall, and following these was a steady growth in the residential development of the area. This view from the south shows the popularity of the boating pool at the turn of the century. In 1906, the original spar was burnt down, and its replacement also suffered in a mysterious blaze in the January of 1932. By the end of the July of the same year, the council, who had bought the spa complex in 1919, proudly announced the opening of a brand new hall, which had been completed in less than 6 months. Today, the spa complex still stands proudly overlooking the South Bay, although some new extensions have been added, including the offices of the Department of Leisure and Tourism. And for entertainment, the Spa Royal Hall and the Spa Theatre play host to some of the country's leading stars of stage and screen. As the years have rolled by, Bridlington on the east coast of Yorkshire has brought pleasure to thousands upon thousands of people from all walks of life. A delightful town set in a beautiful bay and backed by the rolling farmlands of the Yorkshire Wolds. And Bridlington has responded to the changing needs of the residents and visitors alike to become one of the best-loved resorts in the whole of Britain. And these changes are to carry on, as exciting new developments to the town are to come in the future, with plans for a multi-million-pound venture to provide a new leisure complex within the area of the South Bay, to take Bridlington, its residents and visitors, successfully into the 21st century.